All right, welcome back to the channel. All right, man. In women's fighting, we have the GOAT. Okay, we have the GOAT without a doubt, and the GOAT ain't Claressa Shields. It's Amanda Nunes, and from a big boxing fan, that is such a hard admission to make. But let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. I am a huge fan of women's sports. I love women's tennis, love women's track and field, really enjoy women's basketball, love women's sports. In the world of boxing, love women's boxing, love women's fighting. Of all my sports, you know that I'm a fan of, however, closest to my heart is women's boxing. Unfortunately, women's MMA is without a doubt the superior product, and the fighter, their number one fighter, I have to agree with her when she says it, is the greatest woman fighter of all time. And that is Amanda Nunes. And despite Claressa Shields saying that she's the greatest of all time, what I have seen Amanda Nunes do in Amanda Nunes' career silences all of that. Silences Layla Ali, silences Cecilia Brækhus, Claressa Shields, and Wolf. The whole lot fall behind Amanda Nunes. Now, let me explain why this is. Before I do that, though, I want to say special thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for watching the videos. Thank you guys so much for all you guys do in the Patreon and as members to the channel. So, boxing is my favorite sport, but women's fighting is at a completely different level. Now, Amanda Nunes just won a fight last night. I didn't get a chance to see it. I didn't support the UFC card. But Amanda Nunes beat Fletcher in a unanimous decision. Now, I wasn't very familiar with Fletcher. It's probably why I didn't watch the fight. But after the fight, Amanda Nunes, I think she got her second division. So she is she is holding two belts at the same time in the UFC. I think it's the featherweight and the bantamweight titles. After that, she said that I wanted to prove that I am the greatest. Okay. Claressa Shields says she's the greatest. Amanda Nunes says she's the greatest. Amanda Nunes' case she has beaten in the UFC Chris Cyborg, Holly Holmes, Shevchenko, Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate. You look at Claressa Shields, nobody that I can think of on the level of notoriety or stature in their sport as any of the people that I've named, with the exception maybe of a Miesha Tate. But Chris Cyborg had a reputation for being an absolute monster. And when I saw her, see, this is what makes me believe that Amanda Nunes is great. I've seen her fight at least three people who were supposed to be absolute killers that she was supposed to lose to, and she mopped all of them. Ronda Rousey was supposed to be the biggest thing. She was actually talking about fighting men and whether she could beat Floyd Mayweather Jr. Now, not that I ever took that serious or many people ever took that too serious, but she did. But when she fought Ronda Rousey, and knocked her out. Now, that was after Holly Holmes had knocked her out. But when she knocked out Ronda Rousey and retired Ronda Rousey like she did, I was like, okay, wow. All right, Ronda Rousey, got exposed. That's where it started. Ronda Rousey just got exposed. She got beat by Holly Holmes. She can't take a punch. Why wasn't she? She should have stuck to her judo game. She should have stuck to grappling, trying to throw hands. That ain't her deal. So there was a lot of stuff that, when she originally beat Ronda Rousey, I didn't think too much of it, right? I thought more about the fact that Ronda Rousey got knocked out again. But then when I saw her beat Holly Holmes, then I was like, okay, no, she's really, really good. She's really good. And then when she moved on to beat Chris Cyborg, because Chris Cyborg had been, and this is somebody who's I'm not a every time MMA fan. I'm a casual MMA fan, very casual MMA fan. But when she beat, for me, Chris Cyborg she was that. She was this hulking woman, was beating everybody and been beating everybody for years. There was all the talk about her fighting Ronda Rousey. And Ronda Rousey, whether she would, that was who was supposed to be Ronda Rousey in my very casual MMA eyes, right? And then, so she then goes in and beats Cyborg, and she knocks Cyborg out. Man, just runs through Cyborg. I'm like, okay, wow. Yeah, now this is it. At that point in time, you have got to consider her great. Okay, now a prerequisite to being called the greatest of all time is that you are great. And I have to say that the career of the career of Amanda Nunes fits that definition to the T. And as a result, has to be considered the top female fighter in the world. And I don't know, as far as when you compare men's boxing and men's boxing and men's MMA, I'm not trying to hear that with the MMA. Okay. The greatest fighters in the world, in my opinion, are boxers. The greatest fighter in the world of the females, the female combat sports, that's probably what I say, combat sports, are the women in MMA. Now, why would I say that? Well, part of that is because of the problem that Claressa Shields has. When you look at MMA and you look at boxing and the histories of them, boxing goes back to the 1600s. And so you have conversations that you can have about boxing, and that I do on a regular basis have conversations about boxers and fights that took place in the early 1700s, right? The first real notable fight to take place in the sport of prize fighting / boxing was Tom Melanois and Tom Cribb in the early 1700s, right? So that was over 300 years ago. So boxing, you have 300 years of history, of fighters, of fights, right? So when people do things that are exceptional in the sport of boxing, it's something that echoes throughout the centuries. It's something that's MMA, on the other hand, for men. It's just, it's a flash in the pan so far. To date, it's a flash in the pan. It's shiny right now. Is it real? I don't know. Check with me in about 100 years. Now, in 100 years, so that's where MMA is. MMA is in the stage right now that boxing was in 1800s, right? If you could argue, maybe early 1900s. To be gracious, we'll give it early 1900s. MMA now is where boxing was. In the 1920s. We'll say the 1920s. We'll go to the 1920s. Give them the 1920s. Now, so that's when you compare men, the disciplines, that discipline. Now, when you look at women's MMA and women's boxing's been around longer. But relative to men's boxing, just showed up, right? It's as an Olympic sport, it got there in 2008. I'm pretty sure that women's judo has been in the Olympics as long as women's boxing has. So, and then if you look at the parity between the two now, right, between MMA's men and MMA's women, MMA's men, I suspect on the outside looking in, might be a little bigger, but they have major stars in women's MMA, and consequently, you have women who are boxing in different disciplines of fighting wanting to get into women's MMA. Women's boxing, like Claressa Shields, this is just the truth. For Claressa Shields Claressa Shields could get much more money fighting Amanda Nunes than she could get fighting anybody in boxing. And I would have to check, but I'm fairly confident that Amanda Nunes is also making more money. I think for Holly Holmes, she got something like $700,000, like maybe $500,000 plus a win bonus of like $200,000. So you're talking like $700,000 for major championship fights in women's MMA. And that is nowhere near that. Nowhere near that for women's boxing. I do believe Claressa Shields does something around $250,000. I've heard rumors that she's made close to $500,000 before for a championship fight, but I'm suspecting that I think it was closer to $250,000. Not a bad payday for women's boxing. Huge payday for women's boxing, but not quite the level of the pay for women's MMA. And as a result, you have a lot of women that are focusing on that. And there's a lot more competition. It's not possible for me to name as many female boxers, legitimate women's boxing matches for Claressa Shields to have, right? Then I've already named that Amanda Nunes already has, right? There's not Cyborg, Rousey, Holmes, Tate, Shevchenko. There's not women that are held in that high regard. Not that many women in all of women's boxing that regardless of the weight class, right? In women's boxing, at the top, you pretty much have three. You have Claressa Shields, Katie Taylor, and Cecilia Brækhus. And they're all in radically different weight classes. So, it's just, my hats go off to Amanda Nunes, and I think Amanda Nunes is right, man. I think she's the greatest female fighter of all time, regardless of it's boxing or if it's mixed martial arts. And honestly, I wouldn't put anybody in the ring with that chick, dude. That's a killer right there. Anyway, it is what it is. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.